Well, it's time for episode 28. With you, as always, is me, Chucky, and we've got Jigsaw.
It's your boy, Jiggy.
True that.
Two of the whitest guys.
You think I'm white?
It's possible.
I'm offended. So, 5 movies again. For this week's show, we've got Silent Hill from 2006, a video game adaptation. Then we move on to what seems to be a remake of the 1960 movie Eyes Without a Face. So we've got Faceless from 1987. Then we move over to The Ugly from 1997, which is kind of like a serial killer movie. Then we've got Terminator 3, The Rise of the Machines. No real explanations needed about that. We know all about Terminator. Then we've also got Black Christmas from 1974, classic slasher movie.
So we start off tonight with Silent Hill from 2006. Based off a video game series, the movie sort of follows a woman and her adopted daughter as they voyage into the sort of a secretive ghost town of Silent Hill, where strange things begin happening and hallucinations / ghosts / demons / who cares because it's never explained start going down. So, just to give a little backstory of my history, I saw this once before, many years back. It's one of those movies that I saw like when I was pretty young, so I didn't remember much about this. So, I was sort of excited to, go into this one again with fresh eyes. And boy, I'm looking at the IMDb rating at 6.5, and I just don't see it. Now, I guess I should say I have no history with the game. I've never played any of the games. I've never seen any gameplay, so I have no idea how closely this follows how the games go. I just know that based on what I saw, even at a 2-hour-long movie, I don't think there was sufficient explanation given for some of this stuff. There's a lot of interesting ideas. I just don't think all of it worked together. But before I'm going to be talking a bit about why this movie is probably one of the worst movies of the night. But before I do that, what are your feelings on this one, Chucky?
Okay, so my history with this. So I actually did grow up playing these games. I completed the first 2 games back when I was a teenager, but well before this movie was made. I think I also played a bit of Part 3. I believe it's kind of like a mixture of all those 3 games kind of rolled into one. But I don't think the actual story in the movie is like the exact same story that's in any of the games. It's, like I said, a bit of a mixture. And I did watch this originally at the theaters as well. I'm sure I definitely like the movie much better than you do. I still don't think it reaches the level of being a good movie, but I think it's decent. Probably the main thing it does best is it does kind of capture the atmosphere of the game. I think that's the one thing it does pretty well. Like, it does a fair job in, establishing the right setting. It just has that essence from the game that I think they did capture pretty well. And they've also using, I think, mostly the same music from the game, and I think the music was pretty unique, stood out a little bit from time to time. And also some of the characters, there are some characters who sort of resemble people from those games, like Laurie Holden, who plays the cop. At least while she had the helmet on, she looked exactly like the cop in the first game, to my memory. Aside from the atmosphere, I think there are some issues. I do think the movie runs on a bit long. It is definitely a bit of a confusing movie in terms of that it doesn't explain anything too easily. I remember after watching the movie at the theater, and I went home, and maybe it was even after I got it on DVD, but I remember going to IMDb or some other websites just seeing what the director was saying about the movie, and there were certain things that he explained which did clear up, or at least shed some light on what was actually kind of going on with some of the confusing plot points. And I know that's not necessarily what you want out of a movie, because you don't want to have to be able to go, to IMDb to try and get some answers, but I thought it was interesting, just a little convoluted.
Yeah, I think it really picked up around the conclusion once it got all like Hellraiser type stuff going on. And yeah, I don't think, well, let me rephrase. I'm sure most of the things in this movie make sense in the right context. It's just my understanding was lacking. I did like the ending though, so that was okay. I liked the sort of, I don't know if you would call them dimensional shifts or what have you. It was an interesting idea. It's just that for some movies, even if there are some decent things going on, sometimes the plot, if it doesn't come across that well, makes it a bit more difficult to fully get into it. On a quick side note, some of this CGI looks really aged. Like, I know this was made back in 2006, but some of the stuff, it's like the cockroaches, I don't know if they're cockroaches, just some giant insects. This just look pretty horrible in my opinion. But it's to be honest, I sort of think the movie did what it was trying to do. Though I think there are probably other movies based off Silent Hill that do it better. But I don't know, it strikes me as a movie that unless you have a deep connection with the game, the movie itself, if you watch it like alone without knowing anything else, it's just going to end up being a somewhat forgettable experience.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting because you're saying that you kind of like some of the later parts of the movie, and I'm more on the opposite end. I kind of preferred the earlier parts to the movie, or that just stood out to me more because I think as they were establishing that atmosphere and setting, I was very appreciative that it actually did look and feel a lot like one of the original games. I think the original game. It's been so long since I played it. It's been like 20 years. But kind of once that wore off, then I started focusing on the actual story and things like the CGI. I think the CGI is okay. Obviously, some of it does stand out a little bit, but it's certainly not as bad as that time where I rewatched Deep Rising. God damn. It is a movie for me that gets a little, I guess maybe a little less, not exciting, but I don't know. Just like I said, with the appreciation I had for the setting and atmosphere, that wore off as the movie went along. I mean, I didn't really care so much for the Sean Bean portion of the story.
That seemed almost pointless, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you could kind of remove him from the movie, remove that little subplot of them kind of both being in the same place, but in two different kind of, like you said, dimensions.
Yeah, one thing I will give the movie some credit for, and you mentioned this, but the atmosphere at certain points is pretty good. I guess I sort of have to bring this up too. There's another movie that's based off, I believe it's Silent Hill 2. It's a Spanish movie called Broken Notes, which I've reviewed, and it's a somewhat obscure movie, but that movie feels to me like when I compare the atmosphere between Broken Notes and this Silent Hill movie, I get a lot more authentic feeling from the Broken Notes. Because, I mean, this one, I know I'm just watching some decently high-budget Hollywood production, which, I mean, it sort of takes out a little bit of the, I wouldn't say magic, but, it's just, I did get the authentic feel from it. Whereas, with a sort of lower-budget production, when they can craft a sort of a airy, mysterious, somewhat befuddling atmosphere, I just think it comes across better. Which I'll just say, if you are a fan of the Silent Hill games, I would definitely recommend checking out Broken Notes, which can be found with subtitles. It's a movie that I did it personally like, because again, story was confusing, but I think it's an experience that might be worth your while.
I did actually look for that movie once. I think I found it, but I don't think I found it with the actual English subtitles, so I didn't really get to watch it.
Well, maybe someday. It's one of those movies that I don't know how I came across it, to be entirely honest. I just did. Maybe my brother gave it to me or something, I don't know. Just keep an eye out. It's unlikely to hit Blu-ray anytime soon. But
Yeah.
this movie, Silent Hill, I think gets the atmosphere done okay. But I just couldn't help but compare it to, Broken Note, which I think did actually a sort of better job with that.
And I think Broken Notes from memory feels like more of like a scene for scene recreation of Silent Hill 2, the game, which I think Silent Hill 2 is pretty much unanimously the best game or most beloved game in the series. Yeah, so maybe that helps it in a little way, and also because it's just focusing on that one story and not kind of mixing those first 3 games and trying to come up with its own story.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I said, I don't know anything about the games. I'm not sure how much of this movie, like the whole thing with the religious cult, I'm not sure how much of that came from the games and how much was how much of it came from the one specific game and how much was combined. But like I said, some of the stuff, I feel like they could have gone about it a way that made it more accessible. I suspect if you play the games and you come into the movie, you can follow along with probably a decent amount, even if they change up some characters or I don't know, that whole doppelganger thing. I guess there were 2 doppelgangers. I mean, it's something that I had difficulty getting by. But if you have some, I guess, base knowledge of the games, it might have helped a little. I really think they could have gone about it a slightly better way. And like I said, the movie's like 2 hours long, and there's probably a longer version out there. So it's not like they didn't have time to play around with. But I mean, I get what it takes like an hour before we even really know what's going on. It's not longer. It's just it's a bit much.
I think video or horror video games in general tend to have some pretty unique and interesting concepts and stories. Probably even more so than just films in general. I mean, we hear all the time people saying whenever there's a remake or a new movie that just some generic supernatural movie or generic slasher movie, whatever it is, just like a copy of something we've seen in the last 20-30 years. People are saying, come up with something original, do something original. And I think there's quite a few video games out there that have a lot of, or at least do a better job of coming up with something more original and unique than what we see in a lot of movies. So
yeah, I suspect a lot of that's probably because there's a lot more mobility with games. You can do a lot more than you can do with movies, and they can actually look okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I played. Like I said, in the past, I'm not a big gamer. I played a few games in the past, a few horror games, and I've enjoyed them. It's just, and I definitely recommend trying to get into them if you can, because, like you say, they can do a bit more. And there's some really creative plots out there. But it's just not entirely my own thing.
Yeah.
So this is a movie, like I said, that I was interested in seeing again. I was optimistic, but I wasn't foolishly optimistic. I didn't really anticipate liking this one that much, and I sort of didn't much care for it. And I thought it had some cool ideas. I thought it had a decent atmosphere. I liked the whole dimension shifting, sort of, though some of the CGI during those shifts looked noticeably terrible. Like the whole, I guess, Pyramid Heart is the name the character usually goes by. No idea what it was never really explained. I think it only pops up a few times. But hey, it looked cool, so that's all that matters, am I right? Yeah, I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Mainly because I don't have it in my heart to give it much lower, just based on that I don't know that much about the source material, so it's not necessarily fair. I just really think the movie could have done a better job of making the plot more accessible. But 5 out of 10, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 7. It's not enjoyable enough for me to... I mean, an 8 out of 10 is what I consider to be a good movie, and it just, it doesn't quite get there, but I really did appreciate that the atmosphere and setting of the movie is very similar in many ways to some of those first couple of games, and I thought that was the main thing that I enjoyed from the movie. The story's a bit iffy, convoluted. It's a bit tough to really know everything that's going on. In some ways that can be good, but in some ways it's a bit damaging as well. The CGI is a bit iffy at times. They did some good things with the movie, but they just didn't nail it. So up next we've got FACELESS from 1987, which seems to be... I mean, it's listed as a remake of the 1960 movie Eyes Without a Face. I haven't ever seen that movie. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of classic movies like that.
Yeah, I would just say I think calling it a remake's a bit of a stretch. It uses some similar themes, but I wouldn't personally call it a remake myself. Who am I?
But anyway, the movie starts off with a doctor who's around on the town with his 2 lovely ladies.
Well, one's his sister, so...
yeah. But anywho, he's confronted by a former patient who was left somewhat disfigured after some treatment she had. And so one of those ladies, so to speak, takes a bullet for the doctor by jumping in front of him, while some sort of acidic type liquid's thrown at his face, which leaves her terribly disfigured in the face. So the doctor vows to one day restore her beauty, and so beautiful women are being drugged, kidnapped, experimented on, and are also possible candidates for this extreme face-swapping procedure. Then there's also a subplot in which one of the women who has been kidnapped, she just happens to be the daughter of this wealthy businessman who's hired this guy to investigate her disappearance and bring her back safely. So I've seen this movie now twice. The first time I watched it, I can't remember how I came across it, but I did, and I watched it. I was somewhat surprised at how much I enjoyed it the first time. I didn't think it was like an all-time great favorite movie of mine or anything, but it exceeded my expectations when I first watched it. And watching it again, I still enjoyed it just as much as the first time. I thought, I haven't watched a whole lot of Jess Franco's stuff. I know he's got a bit of a following of his own. I've seen a few of his movies. The only one that I vividly remember is Lorna the Exorcist, so I kind of have a little bit of a feel for how his movies are made, but yeah, I don't know. But anyways, this one, I guess you could call it a French movie, but with English dubbing. And as we know, I have a bit of trouble with the French. I think they just... I don't know, the way they act, they don't feel completely human to me. Anyways, there is this one German doctor in the movie who, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he says something like, the French are very strange people. I was like, this doctor speaks to me very much so. And maybe it's also because I do have some German blood in me too, so maybe that's a German thing, I don't know.
Yeah, so when this movie was suggested, I guess I briefly heard about this movie, but it's not something I really looked into that much. And much like you, I don't have that much experience with Franco's movies. I can't swear to it. I feel like I've maybe only seen, let's just say, 1 or 2, and off the top of my head, I actually can't name any. And it looks like he has like over 200 movies, so I'm not going to take the time to look through. But this movie, it sort of took me by surprise. It was a lot, the story took a little to get into, but once it got going, I thought it went pretty well. I think one of the more outstanding things about the movie, and outstanding is used somewhat loosely, but it did definitely stand out, would be the goal. especially during the operations on some of these women's faces. Some of them, which they do look fake at times, but they're so decently gruesome, even in ways that sort of surprised me. And I mean, especially like toward the second half of the movie, there's a few scenes that are like, they go a bit further than you might initially expect, which I'm okay with. The whole this woman being locked in like a secret basement and somebody's looking for her. I enjoyed that enough, but it's not like a story that's necessarily going to wow anybody. I think one of the reasons this is notable is just because it had it had a pretty decent goal, and I was happy with that. And even though the movie sort of goes on a bit longer than I wish it did, it's still a pretty decent movie, and there's some like really, like I said, gruesome things at the end. That when I was watching this, I think I finished this last night. It just sort of like took me back. It's like, oh hey, that was actually pretty okay.
Yeah, with the gore that you mentioned, I thought the same thing. It does look a bit fake at times, but you really do appreciate kind of what they're going for. It is like one of those eye-popping moments in the movie whenever you see that. Like you see the kind of like the bug eyes standing out from the mutilated faces. And there's some decent kills in the movie too, like a wide variety. There's like eye stabbing, there's scissors through the throat, there's chainsaw decapitations, there's someone getting drilled. There's some there's a wide variety of deaths in the movie, even though it's not like a huge body count movie.
Yeah, also actually worth mentioning too, and this also stuck out to me, but the conclusion of the movie is a bit more somber than you might be used to. I mean, it ends on sort of like a like, hey, they won't get away with this type note, but for a lot of the endings, it's just somewhat depressing. Like things aren't looking great for the main characters.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to talk about the ending a little too, because I do like that it's kind of, in one way, it's a bleak ending, but at the same time it does kind of leave a little bit of hope at the end as well, just as the credits about to roll. It really depends on what portion of the story you're dragged towards, because I think if you're more focused on, okay, is this guy going to find this man's daughter, is he going to bring her back home, that's one story. Then there's the other side of the story, okay, are they actually going to succeed in restoring this woman's face? And I mean, without spoiling the movie too much, I guess you could say, you could argue that both are potentially successful, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, we don't fully find out by the end. Well, we know what happens with the one woman, but still, there is some question marks left open, and I think it was handled pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for a Franco movie, I've heard a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say negative things about his movies, but somewhat stereotypical. That like a lot of his movies are just gory with no story and such. And this one, I thought it did a pretty good job with the story they were going for. The mystery, portions of the detective, they weren't like entirely great. When he's interrogating the one homosexual guy, that was a bit iffy. Mainly because the stereotypical gay guy was just way too stereotypically gay.
That's another point I've got down here. I've got flamboyant photographer, which...
I mean, he sold out, I guess.
I don't know if it's the dubbing or if they actually intended him to be that flamboyant, but yeah, it was just to the point where it was comical.
Like that big macho bodyguard guy he has with him. That's just beautiful. But, honestly, the story itself was, it was somewhat sympathetic toward the characters involved. I mean, I felt bad for the woman who had her face scarred. I mean, I feel like the methods they went to try to help her out were maybe a bit extreme. But I still feel like they gave each of these characters a bit more depth than, let's say, if the movie had been made like 30 years earlier. they might not have gone into.
That blonde with the weird eyebrows, she's always hanging around at the worst time. Like, there's multiple times in the movie where that Barbara character, the one who is being rescued by this private eye, there's at one point, where she does escape the room that she's locked in, and she's about to open the door to, go into the room with the doctor and the private eye having their discussion, and just before she opens the door, or before they open the door to come out of the room, this woman with the weird eyebrows, she grabs her and takes her away, and then later on, when the private eye does find Barbara, same thing kind of happens. She just strolls along, notices that they're both in that room. So, yeah, she always, she seems to be hanging around always at, the worst time or the right time, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that scene where she caught the woman outside of the office. You sort of know where that scene's going, but even so, that was sort of decently suspenseful scene. And it's just like, you can hope that she makes it, but you sort of know she's not going to, and that's just some good times.
Mm.
And also the decayed corpse toward the end was also pretty okay. The markets and stuff, some quality markets.
They were making a pretty loud noise too. So there's one other thing that definitely must be touched on, and that is the theme song, which gets played 1,000,000 times throughout the movie. This guy singing about cafes and sipping wine in Saint-Tropez. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, but
this movie was drenched in 80s slow music. I mean, I sort of liked. I mean, the music itself, I'm not a giant fan of, but I do appreciate how this movie just went way overboard on it.
Yeah, it's I must say, I remember after the first time watching the movie, I just kept randomly repeating that one line from the song where he's sipping wine in Saint-Tropez or some shit. And even to the point, just before rewatching it again a day or two ago, I was still remembering that particular line even a year or two after I first watched it. And now that I watched it again, it's stuck in my head even more of the song. So even to the point where I've listened to the full song many times now. You can find it on YouTube. Someone's put together a faceless music video type thing for it, which is pretty decent. And it's not the type of song that if I had just heard it anywhere else that I would be attracted to it, but the fact that it's attached to this movie somehow makes it, I don't know, that just happens. Sometimes you listen to a song from a movie, it's not the type of song you'd normally listen to, but for some reason you do get drawn to it just because it's a part of the movie.
Yeah, one of the ones that comes to my mind, and we discussed this, but the song at the end of Prom Night, Fade to Black, I believe it's called, which, it's sort of a slowish sample song, which isn't really necessarily what I listen to, but I find I really enjoy that one, and it's always nice when you can come across music like that, in the movie, especially when you don't expect it. I definitely don't think people would expect that type of thing from a movie like this. I forget what the character's name was off the top of my hand. It's the sort of underling the doctor and the woman had. The guy who raped one of the women there. He had sort of long greasy hair. That scene where he's just sent to that one woman for punishment, and it's just some BDSM type thing. That's one of those things, again, I can only expect from the French.
Yeah, see? Bunch of weirdos.
Yeah, so it's just one of those, really strange scenes that, I don't know, it's not like that scene really mattered much whatsoever, but actually that guy who played the raping guy, I think actually did a pretty decent job. And overall, I think a lot of the characters here had decent actors behind them. So if that would help anybody be more interested, this movie I think takes itself decently seriously, aside from the whole flamboyantly gay guy.
Yeah, so I really liked the movie. I thought it was good, surprisingly good. It does have some pretty good kills, some decent gore. It's got a good mixture of a lot of things. I like a lot of like erotic thrillers as well. Well, usually a lot of erotic thrillers are pretty generic and they don't do anything all that special. But I think this movie has a good, it doesn't go overboard with the sexual side of things, but it's definitely there. There is an erotic side to the movie. There's some good-looking women in it as well, so if that helps anyone out there, I do recommend some of the women in the movie. Surprisingly, not so much a woman with the weird eyebrows, but those eyebrows just did something. I couldn't get past her eyebrows. Yeah, so I'm gonna give it an 8. Yeah.
Speaking of that one woman, it also amuses me. And this also happens with quite a few Italian movies. But it seems like every other woman in this movie is like bisexual. Like every single one. It just cracked me up.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, which I'm sure we can all get behind. It just cracked me up. Because I've seen that thing in a lot of other movies, just randomly throwing some lesbian characters. Of course, there's no gay guys, but whatever. I mean, there was a gay guy here, I guess.
Yeah.
This movie, I enjoyed it a bit more than I was anticipating. To be honest, I was sort of expecting By the Numbers, late 80s French/Italian flick, but it did pretty good. And I think I'm going to lean toward a 7.5, and I'll probably run it down to a 7, if only because if you remove the gore, I don't think this movie would, well, at least for me, I don't think this movie would stand out all that much. But because of the gore, it sort of takes it to the next step. So I think a 7 out of 10, which is average, and like I said, I think it's a bit better than average, but I think that's an okay rating, and this is definitely a movie I'd recommend. And I have to say, I don't hear many people talking about this one. I have no idea what the release status is, but I would definitely give this one a look if you happen to run across it. Speaking of foreign horror movies, next we go with, I believe this movie is from New Zealand, a movie called The Ugly from 1997. Sort of like a psychological horror flick in which this psychologist woman wants to try to understand this one serial killer who's spent, I think, the last 6 years in an asylum. So she goes to interview him a few times, sort of learns his life story. And we see events from his life happen, and it might sound like a somewhat I don't know, maybe cliche movie, but I think especially for a budget, the movie cannot have that high of a budget. I thought it was actually really creative the way they sort of went about the flashbacks and how they integrated events from just maybe 6 years ago to like 15 years ago. I thought it was actually quite memorable. I have seen this one once before, but much like Silent Hill, it's been quite a long time. So I did remember that much about it coming in. But I definitely think it was a movie that was not amazing, and there might be some comprehensive issues about the end. But for the most part, I definitely think it's a movie that is decent.
Yeah, I've seen this one quite a few times. I've had the DVD in my collection pretty much ever since, I don't know, 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. And I enjoy it quite a bit. I think it's a good movie. I have pretty much the same feelings. Like I say, I kind of like the way they go about the flashbacks. I think I wouldn't call it humor that's thrown. I mean, there's kind of just very brief moments here and there, like some of the things where these orderly guys are fucking around with him.
The guys were complete dicks.
Yeah, like even just that one bit where he's making like the wheelchair noise with his
oh god,
with his stick there. Just little moments like that which kind of might make you smirk or something. It's not necessarily meant. I mean, it kind of is and isn't meant to be funny at times, but yeah, there's a few of those moments throughout. Especially like towards the end, kind of where everything is coming together, and I mean, there's this one scene which I thought was fairly emotional, where he's and it's right towards the end where he's talking about how each time these things happen, it gets harder and harder to kind of resist, and I thought the acting at that moment was pretty good. You know, I kind of felt the character's struggles on that kind of emotional level. I definitely appreciated that part. It is a bit of a weird movie as well, a bit of an oddball movie. I don't think there's a whole lot of other movies out there that you could say has a similar feel to this one. So I think it also it is a little unique in its own way as well.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons, at least for me, because the movie comes from New Zealand, it's not like it's a country that's, at least from this movie, it's not like all that different. But just the sort of like the asylum, it didn't seem like a real asylum. We saw one other patient with the two orderlies and the main doctor, and that's literally all we saw. It seemed, and I know I'm sure some of that's budgeting and casting things, but the movie seems somewhat surreal at times. And there's like a whole thing with a lot of the blood being pretty dark, if not black, which I think some people have complained about. I don't really see the big issue, but it's just moments that just come across as more surreal. And even in like the flashbacks, I think a lot of even TV shows do it now, but showing like the characters talking in the flashbacks while the events are happening, it's unique. And I, much like you, I can think of many other things that are like this. I do think the movie, I wouldn't say falls apart, but I do think the last, let's say, maybe 10 minutes aren't as great. I did enjoy, like, I guess, the final portion of his confession with the woman psychologist, but, like, once, she leaves and goes back home, I didn't care as much about what happened afterward. Especially because I don't really get the whole thing with the doctor and the other patient. I have no idea if, like, was there a thing? I don't know.
Well, the doctor's just as weird as some of the patients.
Yeah. That doctor I thought was a really interesting, really interesting character. I mean, he even looked like he looked so oddball, and we didn't really learn that much about him. Though I have heard. There are little things in the movie that you can, like, maybe if you see it a lot of times, you can look out for, and things that just stand out, which might give the movie some more depth. I'm not sure if any of that's intentional or just because this was, I think, one of this guy's first movies, so it could just be like inaccurate mistakes. But even so, there's just some even small things in this movie that gave it a really interesting feeling, and it's not one that I think is easy to forget. I was going to ask you, have you seen, at least to your knowledge, have you seen many other horror movies from New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't rattle off a list or anything, but, I mean, New Zealand is sometimes connected with Australia, so I mean, some people will consider New Zealand movies to be Australian movies, vice versa. So, I know Australians in general are pretty familiar with New Zealand, or New Zealand movies, or New Zealanders in general, so I mean, even I mean, I watch a lot of basketball. Even the Australian Basketball League here has a team from New Zealand in it, so yeah, we are pretty close. So I do see a bunch of New Zealand movies here and there, but I mean, there's a couple that I do really enjoy. I don't think they're necessarily horror movies, so in terms of horror movies, I'd have to see a list and then rattle off which ones I have seen.
Out of interest, and this doesn't necessarily relate to this movie, but when you're watching a movie from New Zealand, can you tell it's not Australian?
It really depends on who's in it. Like, this particular movie, I would say no. Like this movie actually feels like it. I mean, if no one told me that it was from New Zealand, I would struggle to know if it's New Zealand or an Australian movie, to be honest. I know there's some people out there probably from New Zealand saying, no, this is definitely a New Zealand type movie, but...
Well, there's a lot of movies I can watch here, and there might be Canadian movies. I just assume they're American, because you can't tell much difference.
I mean, there's some other movies where it has like Islander people in it, Maori type people in it, and those specifically you could say, okay, this is definitely a New Zealand movie, but it was just random white people from New Zealand in it. I can't tell the difference all that clearly.
Actually, I'm sorry, I do have one more thing. I forget what the character's name was. Maybe Julie. It was the girl who was the who tried to be friends with a kid, the guy serial killer when he was a kid, and who sort of popped up later in the movie. I thought she was a pretty interesting character. I sort of liked, one of the more emotional scenes was when she was trying to connect with the kid, and the mother, who has to be one of the worst mothers I've seen in a movie. Like, talk about an abusive mother. I just laugh at, this your father wrote that he says he hates you and that's why he left us. Yeah. It's probably not what he said.
Well, just while you bring up the topic of the mother, it did remind me of one specific shot in the movie that really stands out to me. The one where he's walking back home and he sees his mother in the doorway. It's got this like red light behind her. I don't know. It's just the way that particular shot popped out. I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for a movie that seemingly doesn't have that high of a budget, that scene in particular was like really good. And I mean, talk about an unlikable character in the mother. I mean, honestly, I have a hard time when when somebody has such a a lifestyle growing up under that type of thing. I have a really hard time hating somebody who has to go through something like that and comes out messed up. I mean, how else are they going to come out? So it just, I mean, in many ways, despite the guy being a serial killer, he's a decently sympathetic guy in my opinion. And the actor who plays him, which is a name I can't necessarily pronounce, but Rotondo. He, I don't know the guy, but he did a really good job in his role.
Yeah, he did win some sort of award for Best Actor. I don't know what other movies he was up against, or what other performances he was up against, but he did win an award for this movie, I believe.
Yeah, I can certainly see why. So, like I said, I've seen this movie quite some time ago, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing it again. I don't think it's an amazing movie. And like I said, I think the conclusion's a bit iffy. But there's sort of quite a bit to like about this movie, just going through the life of this messed up kid. And there's some emotional scenes thrown in, there's some sort of surrealistic stuff going on. So I'm going to give this movie a 7.5.
I was like, jeez.
I know. So 7.5, and much like Faces, I'll probably round this down to a 7. I think the movie is pretty good, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it. It might be a little different, but even for the budget, I think it's probably worth seeing.
Yeah, I'm going with an 8 out of 10. I really enjoy it. Having such a sympathetic character who's also technically a bad guy, he's a bad guy in one way, and you can look at him in a totally different light in another, but yeah, I just like that, the emotional touch to his character, and I mean, there's one scene where a guy gets scared by a coat rack, so who can't be...
I like how that sticks out to you.
Yeah, who can't be happy with a scene like that? Anyways, yeah, I really enjoyed that one, so 8 out of 10, I like it. Okay, so next up we've got Terminator 3, The Rise of the Machines, from 2003. So it's kind of, in some ways, a similar plot to the previous movie. You've got two Terminators who are both sent back once again, one still with the mission to eliminate John Connor, but this female Terminator also has a side mission to kill other members of the future resistance, while our other beloved T-800 type machine, I don't know if it's T-800 or another slightly different model, but it's still Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he's there with the mission to protect John again, and well, there's a little more to what he's doing in the movie, but without spoiling too much of it, that's in a nutshell what he's doing there. The funny thing is, I actually saw this movie 3 times in the theaters. 3 times. Once, and not necessarily, I mean, I definitely enjoyed the movie, but usually when I see a movie 3 times in the cinemas, it's because I think it's like a 10 out of 10 type movie, or near thereabouts. It's not near a 10 out of 10 movie for me, but I think I was roughly about 18, maybe close to 19 years old. Actually, I might have even been 19 years old, actually. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was attending this one college in the city, and after classes were done, instead of going straight home, because I live very far away from any kind of theater growing up, so going to the theater was like a very special type treat to happen. And since I was just walking around in the city, I was like, okay, I saw Terminator 3's playing, I really like Terminator 2, I'm gonna go watch this. So I watched it by myself the first time and enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought the action was really good. There's some really good action scenes in the movie. Obviously, it's not as good as the second movie, but I think people in general give this movie a little too much shit. I think it's pretty good. At the same time, one of my friends, he was in the city with me. I was like, hey, I saw Terminator 3. It was pretty good. You should go check it out. So we both went and watched it then. And then also at the same time, shortly after, I had started dating my now wife. And, I said the same to her. Hey, Terminator 3 is pretty good. You should see it. So we went and watched it. Yeah, so that's why I saw it 3 times. But yeah, like I said, I think the action in the movie is pretty good. There's some really good scenes, especially that one scene towards the beginning where they first, both the Terminators kind of run into John and they're having that chase through the city. I really like that scene. The story, I think, is still pretty decent. They expand on it a little bit or alter it now that things have changed. And I thought, what's her name? Christina Loken? I can't remember her first name. I thought I think this was her first movie, actually. Or if not, at least her first big movie. And I thought she did pretty well, all things considered. I mean, there was a lot of reservations people had about, a female Terminator. And there's some surprisingly gory moments, like that one scene where she just punches a guy through the stomach. There's some horror type elements to her character and the movie in general, just like there were with the previous movies.
Yeah, so much like the other 2 movies which we've previously spoken about, I've never seen this one before. I didn't know. All I knew about it was, hey, it's the new one that nobody cares for. And it's the movie's fine. The problem for me is, I didn't think either of the first 2 movies were like amazing. I thought they were decent. I thought they were pretty good, but neither one blew me away. And this one, it had like other action sequences and it had like a decent story, but there's no oomph to it. Like, especially, I know you just mentioned that I like the sequence, but the chase through the city, it was decent at the beginning, but then it just kept going and going and going. I'm like, okay, like it lost some of its power. I liked seeing all that property destruction. It was sort of cool, but it just. And this is one of the things I think I mentioned I forget if it's the second or first movie, but some of these characters shooting at this female Terminator, the bullets are literally doing nothing. Just save the bullets for something that's actually useful. And I know it makes them think they're accomplishing something, but they're really not. And I don't know if there's going to be some giant bullet manufacturer once, Judgment Day happens, so they might have to conserve some of that. But I don't know, and that's a small thing, but I just think this movie sort of lacked the, I guess for lack of a better word, some of the the magic of the first two movies. And that may be partially because it, came out in the early 2000s as opposed to the 80s. But it just, the story was decent. I liked the idea of the, female robot coming back to assassinate some of the future leaders of the Arabo movement. But it didn't, take me for a ride nearly as much as the first two movies did. Which isn't to say the movie wasn't enjoyable. It definitely was at, times. But it just wasn't as much an experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've only seen the first two Terminators once a piece, so I may be the it's a bit different than probably most people who have seen this one.
What did you think about? I mean, the one thing about the first two movies is, okay, when these guys, Terminators or whoever it is that comes back through time and they arrive naked, and there's always some, there's a scene showing, okay, how they go from being naked to getting some clothes, and it was always interesting in the first two movies. We got Kari's, he's naked, he has to kind of break in, well, he kind of steals some clothes from a bum, and then he breaks into like a sports store and gets some shoes or whatever, and then, we've got Arnold who just basically robs a bunch of punks on the street, and then we've got the bar scene in Terminator 2, and then we've also got another another bar scene in this one. What did you think about that scene?
No, admittedly, I did find that somewhat amusing. It was, I sort of like that disdain. He puts his sunglasses on. It just doesn't do it for him, so it just destroys him.
The Elton John sunglasses, yeah.
I mean, I feel like it should have made a difference, but hey, maybe they were just a slightly different shade than what he was looking for. I know, it was pretty amusing though. I definitely enjoyed how the women were certainly into him when he was walking in there. So I am happy they got a piece of him. It's actually amazing to think that not long after that, actually same year, he was like literally the governor of California. So it just sort of cracks me up, his big actor, also politician, just walking around. I'm not sure if he was actually nude, probably was, I have no idea. But walking around like that in the movie, it's a bit different than what you might be used to. But he did have a beautiful body.
Yeah, no. He was in impressive shape for a guy who was as old as he was. So.
How old was he when he did this?
Off the top of my head, I have a feeling he was well into his 50s.
Huh.
So I'm just going to have to look this up. But I mean, it's still impressive how good he looks now. I think he's in his 70s now, but...
I mean, I honestly... I know this movie is done, 20 years after... 10, 15 years after the last one. He didn't look significantly older, in my opinion. I mean, he still had enough gumption to go on and do all the stuff he did. Although, I do have to say one thing that maybe I didn't catch. When they go to the mortuary, not mortuary, the mausoleum for that weapon cache, I know he brings the guy out in the coffin and escapes with him. Did they also bring the weapons, or did they just, dump them? He only brought out one coffin. Like a gun.
Well, I didn't watch the movie recently, so I can't tell you exactly. I assume maybe he left some of the guns in there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of the small things that, as I was watching it. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, that reminds me of one other thing I wanted to bring up. If I'm not mistaken, and I was going to look this up, but I can't really type and talk at the same time. One of the characters who appears during the whole scene is the doctor who appeared in the previous movie.
The previous two movies, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that scene, I don't know, it felt like it was thrown in just for comedy. He starts talking to her about, how to get through this, and he's obviously talking more about himself, and Marvel pops up again, and it just, I mean, I sort of get why they did it, but I'm not sure if it was, I'm not sure if it was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't necessarily need to have it, but I think some people just appreciated having someone, another person from the previous two movies also showing up in this one.
Well, I'll just say I did like the uprising of machines toward the end. There was some good stuff, though. And in Before the Hate, I have to admit I sort of like the way I Robot did it, but the Will Smith movie than this one. But both movies are okay.
I hope someone punches you.
Yeah, I know. if you're lucky, maybe sometime at work tomorrow, some guy might do that.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I still enjoy this movie. I still think the first three movies are the best three movies of all the Terminator movies to date. Number 2 is the best. If I had to choose between 1 and 3, I'd probably go with 1, but I still enjoy 3 enough to... I enjoy it almost to the same level as part 1, I think. Yeah, it's still got a lot of good action in the movie. I think the story... They don't do too much damage to what James Cameron did with the previous movies in terms of the story. It was surprisingly fun enough for me. It's even more comical, I think, than either the previous two movies, which may get to a point where, maybe it's a little too comical for some people who enjoy it on the most serious level, but I had enough fun with this one. I give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, so this probably what might sound like me going on about how this movie wasn't that great. It's still an okay movie, it's an enjoyable movie. It just didn't pack the same punch as the other two. So I'm just going to simply give this one an average rating of a 7 out of 10.
That's pretty good. I must say, hey, I appreciate that the Terminator realized it needed bigger titties, and then...
I like throwing in some fan service, only giving this toy explanation for it. Some classy stuff. And I guess the final movie of tonight is probably one of the... Well, it is the most classic... Well, yeah, it's the most classic movie of the night. Classic slasher by the name of Black Christmas from 1974, which is the most famous Christmas movie directed by Bob Clark, and the best one. It's a somewhat, it's a slasher movie. It's one of the earliest, I guess you could say, modern slashers. During a Christmas break, these sorority girls keep getting obscene phone calls, and this body count goes higher as some of these girls die under mysterious circumstances. Some police get involved, they try to tap the phone, figure out what's going on, and that is pretty much the movie. It does feel a bit sluggish at times, in my opinion. I think that's probably more the 70s speaking than anything else. But I do think, it's Black Christmas, it's one of the most classic slashers. And even though I personally not amazed by the movie, I do think it's pretty decent. Plus there's some pretty, I would say great performances, but there's enough faces in here that I know from other movies that just makes it a slightly more enjoyable experience.
I didn't actually really see this one until, well into my adult years. It was only somewhere in the last 5 to 10 years that I actually watched this original one. I do enjoy the movie. I like the scenes with the harassing phone calls. I think it's got plenty of creepy moments in the movie. I guess my not big issue, but if I had to say something that stood out as a bit of a negative, is just... It just feels like a movie that's even older than some of the other movies around its time. Because I think of other movies from the mid-70s, Carrie, Jaws, anything like that, and this movie just feels like it's even older than those. Maybe it's the fashion, I don't know. That one jealous boyfriend type guy, he just had... I felt like, he should be in the Beatles or something. I don't know. He had a stupid hairdo. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was just his hairdo that really annoyed me. I don't know. Something about it just felt like... I felt like saying, hey man, it's the 70s, leave that haircut back in the 60s.
Yeah, it does. Even when I was watching it, it did feel a bit older than what it is. And I'm not sure exactly what to attribute that to.
No, that's my big complaint, man.
But it is nice seeing a lot of these now like stereotypical slasher tropes. The first person point of view. I sort of enjoyed seeing that brought up here, and also it was nice seeing a somewhat younger John Saxon. I've not really seen that many John Saxon movies, to be honest, and this came out 10 years before Nightmare on Elm Street, so it was nice seeing him here, even though his role was like amazingly big. And one of the early victims of this movie was actually an actress that we recently saw in Curtains, well, recently being a strong word, but Lynn Griffin, who played one of the main characters in Curtains. So I recognized her face as soon as I saw it. So it's sort of nice seeing her in a small role this early. And of course, Olivia Hussey, I have no idea how you pronounce her last name. It was also interesting seeing her quite a bit before the TV8 movie. And I actually had forgotten she was in this until I started watching it again. But she just has one of those faces where you instantly recognize her. Yeah, but I think this movie, I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's amazing. And, a lot of the kills themselves aren't, aside from maybe the glass dolphin, I have no idea, that horned whale type thing. That was probably the best kill in the movie just because it was so cinematic. The, Christmas song singing while this one girl's getting stabbed to death. That's probably the best kill here. But, just the whole feel of the movie. I mean, even the very dated scenes, like when the guy's trying to chase the cow. I don't even know what he's doing, to be honest. Is that how phones used to work? I don't know. But it's just so entertaining from, I guess, a modern day perspective. Yeah, so this movie, and actually not a small thing, even though it's like a sort of a Christmas themed movie, honestly, this could take place just during the generic winter, and you wouldn't really notice, aside from like the Christmas carolers, and I guess the exchange of presents near the beginning. There's not really like a whole lot of Christmas themed stuff going on here. It's not like the kid that dresses up as Santa Claus or anything. So I did sort of like the I guess more low key approach they took to this. And also, I guess I should also mention that the conclusion, I think I really like how they went with that conclusion. Much like FACELESS, it's a somewhat somber way to go to it, which makes it, I think, all the more memorable. So I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. It's not my favorite Japanese horror movie. I don't think it would even make my top 25, to be honest. But I do think it's a pretty good movie. And I just really like seeing a slasher movie doing some of the same things that made Halloween, which came out 4 years later, such a hit.
Yeah, I enjoy the movie. I struggle between if I'm going to give it a 7 or an 8. So the first time I watched it, I think I watched it at a really good time, because the first time I ever saw it, I remember it was Christmas Day, nighttime. I'd never seen the movie before, so I'd heard things about it, but I never really even bothered to, see clips of it I just didn't really know what to expect going in, and I came out of it pleasantly surprised, and even more so that my wife really enjoys this movie, because she saw it for the first time when I did. And then I watched it again, I think this most recent Christmas, so a couple of months ago, and I still enjoyed it, but I just felt like the really good scenes, like there's some creepy scenes in the movie, but everything in between was a little, I don't know, just the scenes in between didn't do as much for me as the better scenes in the movie, and I really like the way the movie ends. I like the last shot of the movie. If that shot wasn't in the movie, it definitely would, I wouldn't consider even going to an 8, but because of that shot, that's what's got me in this bit of a bind. I think I'm gonna go with a 7. I like it, but I don't like it enough to compare it to, I think, all the other movies that I give an 8 to. So I'm gonna go with a 7, and it may anger people to know that I did also recently watch the Not the newest remake, but the first remake from, I think it was 2006?
Yes.
It may anger people to know that I also gave that a 7 out of 10.
I am so angry right now. I've never actually seen that movie, but I'm just angry anyway.